Good evening. Thank you. Nice. So we'd like to get started, if we could. I am Laurie Ristino. For those of you, most of you know this place, so I direct the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems. If you are from outside the VLS community, we welcome you here tonight, and thank you for braving the weather. I'm very, very pleased to be introducing this particular guest to you all tonight, a very, very special person. I think it's fair to say that the best time to be inspired to action is during the most challenging times, and I would call one of these a challenging time. That is when our collective goodness and action is needed the most. Today, I'm so pleased and honored to be introducing our friend and inspirational leader, Karen Washington. The New York Times has called her urban farming's granddam. She's also been referred to as urban farming's de facto godmother. In 2012, Ebony magazine voted her one of their 100 most influential African Americans in the country, and in 2014, she was awarded with the James Beard Leadership Award. You get the gist. It goes on from there. Karen grew up in New York City and has been a longtime resident of the Bronx. A physical therapist for over 30 years, Karen was witness to the role of diet in undermining the health of her patients and how our food system perpetuates these harms. Since 1985, she has been a community activist, striving to make New York City a better place to live. As a member of La Familia Verde Community Garden Coalition, she helped launch a city farms market, bringing garden fresh vegetables to her neighbors. Karen is a Just Food board member and Just Food trainer, leading workshops on food growing and food justice for the community gardeners all over the city. Karen is a board member and former president of the New York City Community Gardening Coalition, a group that was founded to preserve community gardens. She also co-founded Black Urban Growers, or BUGS, an organization of volunteers committed to building networks and community support for growers in both urban and rural settings. Please join me in warmly welcoming Karen Washington to our community.
Since this is going to be taped, I got to put my glasses on, make sure I follow script, because I've been off script. Y'all know I've been off script all day. Okay. So, again, good evening. I guess it's evening time. My name is Karen Washington. I tell people I grow food, I feed people body and mind. I want to thank Laurie. I want to thank Fran. I want to thank Leilani for inviting me to come and speak today. The trip was nice. It's cold here, but I'm glad to be here. So my talk is on the colorization of the food system. So I want to start with saying that a diverse food system means a strong and sustainable system. When it comes to the food system, the food chain is the utmost importance. From the person that puts that seed in the ground to the person that delivers your food on your plate. Each has a significant role in the functionality of food. The colorization of our food system shows that community of color are less likely to afford good food, eat healthy food, or at the bottom of the low-paying jobs and at least have the least amount of land and ownership to grow their own food. So as we start to examine the food system closely, food itself does not stand alone. If you look at this diagram, food intersects our environment, housing, education, jobs, and health. And when you look at food in these sectors in this country, it definitely falls along race and economic lines. The struggle for good food, health, housing and education and living wage jobs is an issue of both racial, economic, and social justice because it brings to the surface the social economic disparities we often see in communities of color. And when we don't intersect food and race into social and economic issues, it just feeds into a system that is already dominated by a minority of people, mostly white males in their corporation, thus affecting both the global and domestic market and people's way of living. Food alone has no power, but when we place value on it, it then becomes powerful. So the question I want to ask you all today is, how many of you are willing to stand up for a just, equitable food system? I bet everybody better be standing up, throwing hands. See, I asked that term equitable instead of equality. So what's the difference? So I like this. I like this diagram because what it shows is that equality is when you're treating everybody the same. But equity what it does is that it gives people the resources, what they need to be successful. Treating everyone the same, if you look at in terms of equality, treating everyone the same is actually unfair. What it does, it really erases our differences and instead promotes privilege. So I ask you again, how many of you are willing to stand up and fight for an equitable, just system? Let me see those hands again. This system must include not only farmers, but farm workers, consumers, and fishermen. And if we're going to understand the food justice system, we have to understand when the power dynamics of food shows up in our society. First of all, when we don't have it, it shows up as hunger. When you can't afford it, it shows up as poverty. When it's killing you, it shows up as diet-related diseases. When you don't deserve it because someone told you organic is much better, it shows up as organic food. But when others control it, it shows up as big ag. You know, people used to tell me that the food system was broken. And at one time I was drinking a Kool-Aid, but I no longer believe that. I believe it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, is to, again, design a caste system. Think about it. Who gets the healthy food versus the unhealthy food? Whose lives are most affected by diet-related diseases? What group of people not only grow our food, but now must rely on a subsidized food system to feed their family? According to the report on racial equity in the food system by the Center for Social Inclusion, nearly 16 million children go to bed hungry. That's 1 in 6 white children, 1 in 4 Latino children, 1 in 3 Black children, which is known as food insecurity. Over 30 million Americans live in places that lack access to healthy food. This is mostly seen in our Native American population in the West, and now you're seeing more in urban areas as well. 1 in 6 Americans work in a food system where they are paying less than $2 an hour. And in some instances, if you're undocumented, you're being paid maybe 50 cents an hour. At the end of the day, color does matter. For most, it's about being Black or brown, or for others, white and green. And I'm thinking about how in a country with so much wealth, and we're able to feed the people in the population, we have a crisis on our hand. Has the land of milk and honey become the land of greed and money? So if you look at this map, you will see that most of the poor is in the southern region, West, Midwest, and then Northeast. Hunger and poverty are evident. Right now, we see most in unhealthy and poor communities, both urban and rural. Every second, someone is going to bed hungry, homeless, getting their food from a food pantry or a soup kitchen. I try to show this when I go around and speak because I want to make sure that the state that you're living in is not on this list. And as you can see, the state that has most food insecurity is Mississippi, Oklahoma at the bottom, but you can see that most of this, again, is in the South. If you look at poverty, let's understand this, folks. 45 million people, 14% of our population is in poverty. 13% between the ages of 18 and 64. 19% under the age of 18, and for our seniors, 9%. Facts. If we look at the obesity rate, there are 1 billion people who are overweight. This feeds into type 2 diabetes, hypertension, things unheard of for me as a child growing up in the 60s. And now seeing children developing adult onset diseases. If you look at this, we have an epidemic here. Today, 2/3 of our adult population and 1/3 of our children are suffering from obesity. And if this rate continues, by 2030, 51% of our population will be obese. 20 years ago, no state had an obesity rate over 15%. Now, today, 41 states have an obesity rate of at least 25%. This is me, folks. I live in the boogie down Bronx, Congressional District 17, one of the poorest in the neighborhood. There are more fast food restaurants than there are hospitals and healthy food stores. We are listed 62 out of 62 counties in the state of New York as one of the most unhealthiest. Yet, we live next to the biggest food hub in the nation, which is Hunts Point. As we watch trucks go in and out, bringing good, healthy food downtown to high-end restaurants and hospitals, along with spewing their carbon monoxide, we have a high incidence of asthma. As Laurie said, I was a physical therapist at one time, 37 and a half years as a physical therapist, so I saw firsthand what diet-related diseases have done to my patients, being relegated to medication, surgeries, or machines. I have seen billions and billions of dollars spent on the treatment of illnesses, but not on prevention. Something, again, is unacceptable. But if we're going to move forward in this food movement, we have to understand our history. So, in the 1900s, 40% of our population lived on farms. Now, only 2%. In the early 1900s, we had over 5 million farms. 70% of our food was homegrown. Today, less than 2%, and less for people of color. We have decreased our farm sizes from 3.2 million to 1.9. And it's estimated by 2050, our population globally will increase from 8 billion people to 9.7 billion people, and mostly in urban areas. To know where your food came from in the United States used to mean something. But yet, because of technology, mass industrial production, the small farmer can no longer compete or make it. Doesn't have the money to buy land, doesn't have the capital to purchase machine. And remember, for those who've been around 1970, at that time, the Secretary of Ag, who was Earl Butt, said to the small farmer, either get big or get out. And what I find so astonishing in this food movement is that many of our grandparents and great-grandparents grew up on farms and had backyards. They knew exactly where their food was coming from. They had no grocery stores or bodegas. They never caged their animals, never used chemicals. And they will tell you they were healthier back then than they are today. So how has a handful of companies control the full food supply of millions of people. Well, if you look at what has happened, we have gone from monocropping to basing our food economy on commodity crops such as corn, wheat, cattle, pork. We spend billions and billions of dollars on subsidies. At one point, $245 million was spent to subsidize high fructose corn syrup. We have gone from a local economy to a global economy because of trade agreements. From home cooking to fast food eating. From seasonality to eating everything all year round. But at what cost have we sacrificed our food system? Can we actually say we're much better because we're less labor intensive, more efficient and specialized, or a system where we grow more, import more, and export less? So this boils down to the American diet. The American diet once, which was plant-based with fruits and vegetables and grains, is now become animal-based. As a result, we have seen our caloric uptake increase from 2,000 calories per capita to over 3,800 calories per capita. Diseases that are now related to diet are the leading cause of death and disability, along with predisposing factors such as our environment, economics, culture, and genetics. A food system of overabundance has resulted in a population of unhealthy and obese people. As I stated before, we spend billions and billions of dollars on a treatment, but less on prevention. Why? Because there is big money in those who are poor and infirm. And let us not forget the food companies, because some of our food companies have a handle in this. So you really think that you can control your food system? You can control what you eat or where you eat or what you're going to spend? I say no, because if you look at a typical supermarket, I want you to close your eyes and just look at a typical supermarket, because you can see along the walls, you have your produce. Then you have your dairy, and on the other wall, you have your meat. Up and down the aisles, you have your canned goods, your packaged goods. And those with the most money and power, usually their items are at eye level. However, come into my world, and I say do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, because it's the twilight zone, because as soon as you come into my world, you're hit with the colors of fruits and vegetables, but the packaging is no nutritional value, artificial flavoring and coloring, mostly with an increase of salt and sugar. Yet, companies target our most precious customer, and they are, say it loud, children. And why? Because mommy, daddy, children have the power to control their parents. And they spend billions and billions of dollars mostly on junk food. And companies will, get in and co-op our words, organic, all natural. And I had to put this slide up because at one time I was eating Annie's and Bolthouse and thinking that these were small companies that were independent. But as you can see, major big companies have now gobbled them up. And we thought that this commercialization and industrialization of our food system would enable us to eat less, with less labor and with cheap resources, meaning bigger, better, faster. We have become so mechanized that we have a lost generation of people who have no idea where their food comes from. They could care less about the ethics behind growing food and the dangers that lurks behind a tenuous system. Their apathy is not a conscious one, but the fact that we have placed the responsibility of our food safety and our food system in the hands of lobbyists in the government. We no longer eat at the table. We'll eat up in the game room, playing video games. And families have to work long hours that the only real meal they have to get is from a fast food restaurant because there's no other healthy options that are out there. We have become so detached from our food system that we have a whole generation who will believe that a tomato is grown in a supermarket. This gap will continue to happen if we don't take back our narrative from companies who will have us to believe that ketchup should be labeled a vegetable or that GMO labeling is not in the best interest of the public. Yet what bothers me the most is how we treat the most vulnerable population. And so what I'm going to show you is my interpretation of what our 3 food groups should look like. So these are my 3 food groups. First one, see, is the junk food. The junk food, cheap, low cost, imitates the color and flavor of our foods, see, mostly in low-income neighborhoods and people of color. Fast food, cheap, convenient, also highly addictive, and has hidden dangers. And last but not least, that was supposed to change America, the processed food. This was supposed to change the American food system, but it hasn't. And so when a child is asked where his food comes from and he or she relies on a supermarket, something's wrong with that. When a person can't taste the flavor of his food because he has to add more salt to that, something is wrong with that. When a person can't taste his sweet tea or lemonade because he has to add more sugar to that, something is wrong with that. When a farmer can't make a decent living because he or she doesn't get the true value of their crop, something is wrong with that. When a person has to rely on food pantries and soup kitchens to feed their family, something is wrong with that. When we believe the best way to end hunger and poverty is to increase food stamps and welfare versus the living wage job, something is wrong with that. When we dismiss race as a contributing factor to the underlying disparities in the food system, something is wrong with that. And I said we have lost our minds. And I say that because of the fact that even our palates, which was supposed to at one time taste sour and bitter and astringent, now taste sugar and salt. Even our seasonality, the fact that we're eating watermelon and cherries in December, something is wrong with that. We have people who want us to build walls against the same people who are now growing food in our food system, in our economy, such as farm workers, restaurant workers, and factory workers. Something is wrong with that. When we tend not to acknowledge the fact that our agricultural economy of capitalism we see today was built on the backs of enslaved people, something is wrong with that. We have become a nation where people are getting sicker and sicker, our food choices slimmer and slimmer, and our communities are being displaced off their land or out of their apartments. People are starting to wake up and voice their concern over an unhealthy and biased food system. And I'm here to say that there's a growing movement of people are starting to wake up and trying to take back control of their food system. They understand the power of food and the color of food. This is being played out in cities such as Detroit, Baltimore, Oakland, Boston, and New York City, just to name a few. You see movements such as the Immokalee Workers, Food Workers Alliance, Black Lives Matter, and Black Land Loss Prevention fighting for fair wages, land, and sovereignty. People in the communities that don't have access to healthy food stores are starting to understand the power of food. The time for waiting is over. They're taking matters back in their own hands by starting their own farmers markets, CSA, food co-ops, mobile markets. I can recall how it was back in the 70s and 80s when people were growing food on empty lots. They didn't call it urban ag at the time. This picture is where I live. This was taken back in 1985. However, this picture is prevalent on what is happening today in cities like Philly and Baltimore and Detroit. You know, they call it urban ag, but urban ag isn't new. In fact, people have been growing food in cities for centuries. As a matter of fact, the first sort of urban school garden was back in Philadelphia back in 1807. And if any of you are a little older than I am, you remember this picture, victory gardens, which were done in World War I and World War II. And I hear, that we in urban ag are going to grow enough food in cities to feed the population. And I say no, because it's not about that. The fact is that we grow enough food to feed the entire nation, but that food is not getting down to the people that need it the most. So the question is, again, how can we work together so that it's farmers and consumers that are working together for a just food system? I often hear people talk about this picture. You know what this picture is about? Say it again. Food desert. Okay, so on the count of three, I want everybody to say food deserts. 1, 2, 3. Food desert. Get it out your system, because it's the last time you're going to say it again. Because it's an outsider term that is used to talk about what's happening in my neighborhood. The problem isn't food deserts. The problem is hunger and poverty. Or, if you want to say it, food apartheid. Because when you say food deserts, it still glorifies the fact that, first of all, people in the desert are upset because, we do have food and it's healthy. But the fact is that when you say hunger and poverty, you get at the root cause instead of saying food deserts. So how often do we really think about the impact that color has on our food system? Many of us don't. Subconsciously, we never ask the grocer. We never go into a grocery store and ask the grocer, who was the farmer that produced this food, these fruits and vegetables? Where did it come from? Was the person who was growing that food and harvesting that food, were they giving a living wage job? Time to rest? Was that factory worker or that restaurant worker being paid fairly? It's not just about the food we eat, but the system that encompasses so much more that can't be singled out as one problem or one solution. So when we talk about a sustainable food system that's supposed to be fair and just, are we looking into the fact that race plays a part in it? Or do we examine what is happening from the ground to the plate and filling in the dots? As I mentioned earlier, 43 million people in hunger and poverty. Yet we never think about the true value of food and why. Because some of us has lost our connection to food. Food now has become a commodity based on profits, not on people. So where do we go from here, folks? You're the law students. Where do we go from here? So challenges, lack of land. Every second, land is being lost as we stand here and talk today. People being displaced off their land or from their apartments. Land in city has political consequences. Trying to balance green space and development. In many countries, there's land grabbing. Other countries coming into countries and taking their land. Another challenge, an aging population. The average age of a farmer in these United States is now 58. Last year was 57 and a half, so they bumped it up another half. So it's 58 years of age. Where are we going to get the new farmers from? Who's going to be the next generation to grow our food? Right now, there are instances where they're trying to do what is called student loan forgiveness. Those that are willing to farm for 5 years may be able to have their student loan either diminished or taken or dismissed. Something to think about. Again, poverty and hunger. We should be upset in a country with so much wealth that we have hunger and poverty. I watch each and every day people online for soup kitchens and food pantries trying to get food to eat in these United States of America. Economics. I always tell people, volunteering, is all right. The youth of today, they don't want to volunteer anymore. People want to get paid. Volunteering is all well and good when you can feed your family. But the bottom line is that if we're going to really move this food system forward, we have to think about ways of getting people jobs. Politics. Need I say more? We have to understand, and hopefully we will start understanding the power of voting. In our neighborhood, in our community gardens, we did a plan to vote, registering people for the first time who never voted before. But not only getting them to register to vote, but we have to make them understand and educate how the political system works. Who has the power? Because for too long, people have been mesmerized by politics and politicians, thinking that they have the power, when in fact, who has the power? People. People have to have the power. I try to tell people right now, you should know who your district manager or council person is. I know who my district manager and council person is. You should know who your assembly person is, your state senator, your congressman, your mayor, your governor. These are people who should know who you are, and you should know who they are. And you should invite them to events so that they can see exactly what's going on in your particular neighborhood. And technology, folks, believe it or not, 20% of farmers still don't have access to technology. There's still a digital divide. So when we try to think about communication with a lot of our farmers, we have to be cognizant of the fact that a lot of them still don't have access to technology. So from small farmers to food and farm workers, a healthy food system is not about growing healthy food, but making sure that all parties along the chain are treated fairly and humanely. This phenomenon of people wanting to go back to the land is nothing new. It's not a local movement, but it's a global movement of food sovereignty. That is people having the ability to own their own land, own the way they grow their own food, growing food that's culturally appropriate, access to water, and access to a healthy environment. So what is changing? The realization that we just can't focus on just growing food and feeling that's enough. We must look at the food system at large, namely the face of the food justice movement. For too long, people have been talking. They talk about food justice. They throw those words out. Everybody understands, and they shake their heads. But the question I ask people, so define what food justice is all about. They know the lingo, but they don't know the definition behind what that means. And yet, they'll talk about it, but then it lacks the voices of those people who are affected by it. People of color in underserved communities are told that if they want food security, all they got to do is grow a bunch of carrots. We had that conversation, they grow a bunch of carrots and grow their own food, and all of a sudden they'll feel food insecure. But it goes more than that. It's how are we going to solve the structural isms that are in our food system? In order for the food system to change, we must face the fact that it's about giving and sharing that five-letter word, P-O-W-E-R. That's power. A food system that is dominated by white privilege with a historical frame of power over has to acknowledge that power and give it up. So I tell people, either you're going to share your power or I'm going to take your power. So we have to understand that people with privilege have to think about either you're going to share that power or that power must be taken away from you. So in institutions and colleges and universities and farms and nonprofit, when people talk about agricultural diversity and inclusion, but when you look around in their staff, doesn't reflect diversity, you then just perpetuate a systemic racism system. So, what are your action steps? What is needed to think about how we work in a system that is supposed to be diverse and inclusive? The power of asking. We had this conversation today, the power of asking. Like, how do I, as a person with privilege, able to get into communities that are different than me? It's not about sending an email. It's about community organizing, getting into communities and having that one-on-one conversation about people who you want to help. And not going into communities with that fix-it mentality, but going with communities and saying, I have resources. How can I help and how can I share those resources? Share and tell stories. Folks, I try to tell young people, if you have grandparents and great-grandparents who grew up on farms or gardens, take down those stories, get a microphone and sit down and have them tell you how it was growing their own food, how it was to be able to eat food that was fresh and local with no pesticides. Sit down and capture those stories, because I tell you right now, as we become more distant from our food source, that narrative is starting to change. So if you have the ability to capture stories and share stories, that's highly important. Number 3, break bread with people that you don't know. Make yourself feel uncomfortable to be comfortable. We all cannot look alike in the food system. If we're going to do this work and be more inclusive and more diverse, we have to channel our energy into the fact that we have to be into groups that don't look like us. So if you're around a table, or you're in a conference, or you're in a workshop, and they talk about food and social justice, and everybody look like you, then it's up to you to say, wait a second, something is wrong with this picture. The people that need to be here aren't here. How do we make it more diverse? How do we make it more inclusive? Farmers need to meet farmers. Farmers need to help farmers. Farmers and consumers need to talk. Consumers and farmers need to talk. Share resources. You know what prevents a lot of people from getting ahead are three things: opportunity, capital, and land. Give people, poor people, the opportunity, give them capital, give them land, or give them a business. They can move mountains. And the last, who's always out of the picture when we talk about food and social justice, is our youth. They're our future. They need to have a seat at the table when we talk about food systems. We need to hear from them. They're innovative. They're challenging. They have ideas, but yet we tend to speak for them, and that allows them to have a place or a seat at the table. There are dots along the way that will tell us that this food system is complex in one regard, but simple in another regard. The food movement isn't local, it's global. We all must play a part if we want to see a food system that's diverse and inclusive. So together, we can change this food system by advocating for the right to have food and water. And one time I just had food, but I had to add water because what's happening in Michigan. Food and water that is healthy and safe. The right to have food that's labeled. Now, the fact is, I don't want to get into the GMO controversy, but the fact is that at least by having all food labeled, we can make a choice to eat it or not. The right to have food that is organically grown or naturally grown, no pesticides or chemicals. The right for farmers, fishermen, farm workers to have and receive fair wages and health benefits. This is where y'all play a part in tax breaks and incentives for businesses that want to provide healthy food options. In my neighborhood, you can go every single block and there's a fast food restaurant. And we're trying to get the local government to change the zoning laws so that instead of a fast food restaurant that's coming in on every block, that is a healthy food store instead. Because how do we work on hunger and poverty and diet-related diseases if we're surrounded by fast food stores and junk food stores? But yet the government doesn't understand that we need to change the dynamics and that we need to provide incentives and tax breaks for a healthy food store to come into low-income neighborhoods. To do with antiquated laws that prevent people from obtaining land and growing food. It was just recently that cities like Baltimore and Detroit allowed people to grow food in cities. A couple of years ago, it was illegal. But now, because there's such an interest in urban agriculture from the grassroots people from New York, from Boston, from Philly, from Detroit, from Oakland, who are taking back their land and growing food, that things are starting to change. So this is what I want to leave you, because this is what I say. To grow your own food gives you power. You know who and why you grew it. You grew it for yourself, your family, and your community. Thank you so much, but I got more to say. Don't clap yet. Because from that first picture, you saw that first picture that had the, let me I got the mic now. Because I'm rolling. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so, woo. So you saw that first slide where it had the vacant lot. So, when people don't have anything, like I was telling today, my vision and my lens of poor people have changed. Because poor people are powerful people. They make something out of nothing. And people who could move left New York City. Those that stayed turned those empty lots to look like this. What does urban ag bring? What does it do in terms of having people in areas that have nothing get together and make something? Well, it's teaching young people about where food comes from and how to grow food. It's eating food that's culturally appropriate. It's developing farmers markets and mobile markets and CSA. It's educating our youth to be the next people or scientists or farmer to move the food system. I like this picture because I'm from New York City, and I like the one that has behind this backdrop is a 27th story building where people are growing food. Chickens. At one time, we couldn't have chickens, but it took the people to say, wait a second, look on the law books to find out in New York City we can have chickens, but we can't have roosters. Why? They're 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, right? But we can have chickens. Next, bees. Do you know at one time bees was banned? They were banned in New York City because they were ferocious animals. But it was, the power of the people that went on the law books and says, wait a second, if we don't have bees, we don't have food. And so now we can have bees. Entrepreneurship. How do we move this movement, this food movement, in such a way that has an impact, especially in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color? And it's about entrepreneurship and economic development. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? That's up to you to decide. So again, we have chickens, and in New York City, we can raise the chicken, we can sell their eggs. We can't, process chickens yet, but something to think about. Honey, of course, from our bees, we're able to sell our honey. This is my farmer's market, the La Familia Verde Farmers Market that was started 14 years ago in my community, which had no access to healthy food. And when we asked to have a farmer's market, they laughed at us, saying, poor people are not going to buy, poor people can't afford good food. So I'm saying, okay, well, I need some farmers that will come. Farmers are not coming to the Bronx because it's too dangerous. And they're not coming to the Bronx because it's too far. So let's take the first one. Poor people can't afford good food. Well, poor people as a group spend more money on food than most other people. Per capita, they spend more money. The second, well, it's too dangerous. Well, like the Bronx, like Harlem and Brooklyn, those areas are being gentrified. 3, it's too far. Well, in order to get to the Union Square Market on 14th Street, you got to come down 87, come through the Bronx, go to Harlem, and get down. So when people say negative things, you know you're on the right path. And so we started that farmers market. 5 community gardens represent 1 farm cooperative. We have 4 rural farmers, 2 on site, 1 a Jamaican farmer and his wife, 1 a Mexican farmer and his wife, and 2 local farmers that we pick up from. They have been with us for the last 14 years because it's not per se about the money, it's about making sure everyone has access to food that is healthy and local. Because at the end of the day, if you don't sell your produce, what happens? You got to bring it back to the farm. So you have to find ways where that fresh local produce is then given to people that need it the most. And one thing I would say about our farmers market, no one goes away hungry. Person just getting out of jail, need to feed their family. Take a bag and feed your family. Person got to wait till the 1st or the 3rd of the month for their check to come in. Take a bag and pay us later. Or, I left my stamps at home. I can't pay you now. Pay us later. Or, person, homeless, comes to the market and said, Miss, I'm so hungry. Can I have an apple? Take a bag and fill it up. This is what food justice is all about. So when someone asks you, what's food justice? That's what food justice is all about. So what is the future of urban farming? Because I know a lot of rural farmers are like, what the heck is going on? These city folks growing food. And it's not like we're trying to say that we're trying to take people's jobs, because that's not the point. The point is, how do we educate people to understand where their food comes from? What are the different models of growing food? Aquaponics and hydroponics, rooftops, urban farms, vertical walls, classrooms. This is our rural farmer. These are the Rockham brothers that have been with us. They're from Long Island, been with us from day one. And this is what the future of farming looks like. Hopefully, someone in the audience here wants to be a farmer. Thank you so much. You've been great. All right, you know it's showtime. I don't want anyone to be shy. Questions? Wow, was that good? Yes.
So I have a simple question about the urban farmers market. Thanks. And do you experience any people taking advantage of the system? It seems like a real honor code system.
No, they don't take advantage. People that don't have money, they come next weekend. You know, the reason why they don't take advantage of the system is because they understand that the farmers market is their community market. So the problem that people have is that they have this idea, oh, I want to do a farmers market in a low-income neighborhood. I'm going to go and start a farmers market. And what they never do is ask the community first if they want it. Because the reason why farmers markets fail in other communities, especially in low-income neighborhoods, is because no one asked them. Parachuters coming in and trying to, as you know that's the name, parachuters, trying to come in and put in their ideas. What we did was we asked the community, do you want a farmers market? And when you get a community buy-in, then they protect it, because it's not our farmers market, it's their farmers market. Good question. Yes, and then in the back.
I was reading in the New York Times had like an article a few weeks ago, and it's about the dedicated whole magazine to food, and it was saying that Michelle Obama had done more for the food system from her power of persuasion than any legislative acts within the 8 terms, or within the 8 years. And I was wondering if you had any comments on like moving forward in action plans.
Thank you, Michelle Obama. But you know what? I mean, I think she put the face out there nationally, but people have been doing this for years and not getting credit. You know, in New York City, when they said Bette Midler saved the gardens, Bette Midler bought 50 gardens, and people have been doing this. See, this undermines the movement, because the bottom line is that people have been doing this for years to survive. And so the credit should be given to the grassroots movement that have been growing food. You know, they call us guerrilla gardeners. They have been growing food by taking land without permission and putting seeds in it and growing food. So Michelle Obama did open the doors nationally to recognize the importance of growing food. Let's see what this administration does. No comment.
Thank you for your answer there. I just wanted to, I guess now this question has more to do with New York State and particularly the 5 boroughs. I noticed that this is a farmer's market, La Familia Verde, excuse me. And I was wondering if you could explain or comment on how this is different or how it's related to the green markets and the mission of Grow NYC in New York.
Yes, so Grow NYC, so when we first started the market, like I said, we went to the powers that be, nameless, because this was so unusual. So Grow NYC has a platform whereby they source rural farmers that pay a heavy price to be at their markets. What we did was, you know what? Because like I said, we went to the power that be that laughed at us. we said, let's do community gardens because we're already growing food in our community. We know what our communities want. Let's start a community-based farmers market. Was unheard of. I mean, we had obstacles of people telling us that it will never happen. Also, the city trying to say that now we have to pay them revenue, and it was like, no, we don't, because the money that we make at this market, which is now up to 27. So La Familia Verde was the first community-based market that was started under Just Food, which is an organization. Now it's 27 markets. And so because having community gardens, again, is about that power dynamic and structure. Controlling and owning a farmer's market whereby the money that is made stays in the community, goes back in the community. Green market, and I love them dearly, that money is taken from the community and it goes back to the farm. So that's the difference. Our community-based farmers market, the money, it stays in the community. The people that run it are paid. The gardens are paid. It's about power. Good question.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful talk. I'm curious, I don't know the facts on this, but I've heard that programs that have been focused on getting fresh produce into food deserts, but what we now know is just hunger and poverty.
Food apartheid is good. Food apartheid
Food
is good.
apartheid. That growing up on processed foods, people don't want to buy that food when it is available. And I'm curious, have you run into any issues with that?
And that people don't want to buy fresh food, or they want?
Yeah, that people, even bringing it in from outside, it's not purchased, and people still choose the processed food because that's what they know. Right.
So this is another talk, but I'm going to talk about it now. So this is the problem that I have with the food system is that I'm a farmer. We had this conversation earlier. I'm a farmer, and I'm trying to bring produce, good, healthy produce, local produce in my neighborhood, but yet I have to compete with the food pantries, soup kitchens, and the Pioneer grocery stores. And so and it's about educating, because they're so used to getting that fast food, that junk food, that processed food. And so for me is, how do I then educate my people in terms of understanding the value of food and understanding the health component behind food? And it's a lengthy process, but it can be done when you educate the customer, when you don't put the customer down or the person down because, oh, you're eating junk food? That's horrible. Because when we tell people they need to eat food that is local and organic, it's like, where are they going to get it? But if you say to people, you know what, it's okay that you eat those 99-cent carrots, because you're eating something. And then as you have that conversation, you know what? Educate where those 99-cent carrots come from, or where the food pantry carrots come from. And then you start having that conversation, and I give them my $2 carrots so they can taste the difference. So then now they come back and they say, wow, I'm willing to pay now $2 for this carrots because I understand the impact that junk food and unhealthy food has on my health. Another thing I wanted to bring out, we had this conversation, is that as a physical therapist, I saw with my own eyes what youth, the dynamics that youth were starting to realize when it came to their food and diet-related food, because of the fact that now they had to take care of a mother and father who had to go to dialysis 3 times a week, or a mother or father who had no legs because they were diabetic, or a family member had a stroke and had to take care of that. And understanding that because they were diabetic, hypertensive, because of food that they were eating, they didn't want to be like that. So they started to change their diet. That is happening, folks. When you start seeing your older grandparents or mother and father succumb to diet-related diseases as a young person, you're looking at that and say, no way that's happening. So I'm starting to see that effect of people starting to change because what they have seen in their family. Good question.
So you had mentioned that many farmers don't have access to technology, maybe not like on social media or website. Do you have any suggestions on how to connect possible volunteers to farmers?
I would say, again, it's about organizing. It's about going out into neighborhoods that you're not familiar with and finding those people. And then, with your connections with local schools and institutions that have technology, making sure that that is happening. But you don't know that unless you go out and reach out to those people and find them so that you can get that technology. It's about, again, folks, it's about organizing. If we're going to move this food system in such a way, we need, boots on the ground, door knocking. Can't just go behind the computer and just say, can you come to my next meeting? And people show up. Or talk about food justice and social justice. You know what, I can walk around the room. People will tell me, yeah, I do so much work on food justice, social justice. And they don't have a clue what that means because they've never been out of their neighborhood, never been out of their comfort zone. However, they know all the buzzwords. They've never done anything. So I don't want anyone come to me talking to me about justice if you haven't seen what justice looks like, if you haven't seen what hunger and poverty looks like. And I'm not saying you're looking at CNN or some news report. I mean going out and really seeing the face of hunger and poverty, because it moves me as a person of color to get up 6 o'clock in the morning and see a line full of people in the dead of winter waiting for that food truck to come so that they can get some food in the United States of America. And that's something that we should not accept, but yet we accept it. And when I hear someone tell me they worked at a food pantry for 30 years, something wrong with that. And I know their heart is good, but it has to come to a point where we have to say, stop the madness. And I want y'all all to think, and I put this out earlier, think how it would be if in poor neighborhoods, all of a sudden, everybody owned a business. And all of a sudden, everybody was healthy. Think about that. Who would be out of jobs? Hospitals, right? Drug companies, out of jobs, right? But think about that. And it's about power, y'all. It's about power, because as long as there are people who are poor and infirm, people are going to be making money. Because when a group of people in low-income neighborhoods all of a sudden achieve power where they're owning businesses, they are healthy, that dynamic changes. Power is like a drug. Hard to give up. Hard to give it up. But in order for us to move this system, somehow it has to be either given up or taken. I tell people, you going to give me your power or I'm going to take it.
So the community that I moved here from in Western Massachusetts, and today is Giving Tuesday. So everyone's doing fundraising, and the number one kind of fundraising recipient is the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts, which predominantly buys really cheap vegetables from Canada because they can buy them at 15 cents a pound instead of buying them for like $1.10 or even 60 cents a pound from the local farmers in the area. I mean, they do wonderful things, like they own a farm and pay a few of the local farmers as like this is going to go online. Hi. You guys are wonderful, but it's really like a token to have a local farm, but most of the vegetables are coming from giant farms that are not even being like vegetables that are even being touched by human hands because it's all mechanical. And so I just have feeling like this thing of power is that there's a very powerful entity and a powerful organization, and they do wonderful work, but it's definitely a Band-Aid. And they also work really hard to grow their own entity, grow their own enterprise, and also without really supporting the local farmers in the area, which are struggling and diminishing and aging out. And
right. And who are the faces of those people at the top?
well, predominantly the farm owners are white men, and then the farm workers are migrant workers.
Right. And so, again, like I said, food pantries and soup kitchens do a tremendous job. What I find difficult is when I see grandma, mom, daughter, son, generations and generations, and no one addresses that. For me, it's like, let's get some jobs in here. And I'm not saying jobs are going to, but let's get some sort of economic development. I tell people, you know what, and this is on camera because I always say Warren Buffett, this is the second time, third time talking about, come into my neighborhood, because people are quick to jot people down, to sign them up for food stamps and welfare. But who is signing up for job creation and stocks and bonds? I want to come into my neighborhood and talk about financial literacy, how to save money, how to invest. That's not being talked in my community. I want people to talk about coming to my community and sit down and let's work on a portfolio. But think about if that happened in poor neighborhoods, how it would change the system around. That's what I think about all the time. Because by shifting that power dynamic, and again, looking at neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, and giving them those opportunities we talked about, think about how it would look, how the complexion would change and look. Something to think about. And for you, your homework assignment, y'all got to start asking questions. Y'all got to go out there and challenge the status quo. Challenge the grocer. Challenge the food bank. Challenge your politicians that work for you. Challenge the system in such a way that it's going to change, and not sit back and allow people to eat processed food time and time after again, giving, big cheeses and making people feel good. Thanksgiving, everybody giving out a turkey. Well, at the end of the day, the turkey is gone, but people are still hungry. And for me, at 62 years of age, my lens has changed, my focus has changed, because I used to just think about growing food, and I can't. I can no longer, because growing food impacts people's housing, their education, their environment, their jobs, and they all play a part. And for me, looking at mass incarceration of black people, black and brown people incarcerated, 2 million people of males incarcerated. What impact do you think that has on communities of color when you take the head of household away? And so as a mother that's on her own raising 2 children because her head of household is locked up, you don't think that has an impact on our food system? That's not done for a reason? These are the things that I look at now. My lens and vision has changed. And we need for all of our lens and vision to change. Thank you.